It started as a quiet rumor, then the clip hit the timeline. New fight footage, allegedly of Rick Ross and Birdman squaring up, has gone crazy online. Blogs scrambling, and everybody arguing over what happened. Was this old tension boiling over, or did something new go down? Let's run the tape and break it all the way down. How admiration turned to animosity. The beef between Rick Ross and Birdman, that just won't end. Nah, for real. If you've been tapped into this whole saga over the years, you already know these two got a whole history that goes way back. But recently, some footage been floating around social media, and it got everybody in their feelings again, bringing up all the old drama between the Maybach music boss and the Cash Money Og. Hey, so let me put you on real quick. Rick Ross and Birdman was actually music real tight back in the day. We talking about two southern rap bosses who genuinely seemed to rock with each other heavy. They even dropped a whole music joint mixtape together called The H back in 2008, which finally came out in May 2013. That project had joints like Flashy Cars and Born Stunner, and it really showed how much love these two had for each other at that time. Ross himself been on record talking about how much he looked up to Birdman during that era, straight up calling him an idol who motivated him to go harder in the game, and Baby showed that same energy back, once saying Ross was like a brother to him and even put it out there. He schooled him on a lot of game in the industry. So, how we go from that type of brotherhood to where we at now, that's exactly what we going to break down right here. Hey, so music to really understand how this whole beef jumped off. We got to go back to the beginning and peep the relationship between Birdman and another artist, Lil Music Wayne. See, the tension between Ross and Baby ain't just pop up out of nowhere, fam. It was actually a side effect of that whole publicized fallout between Birdman and his longtime protege Wheezy. Somebody Ross had mad respect for as a fellow southern rap legend. Birdman discovered Wayne when Lil Homie was just 9 years old out in New Orleans' Magnolia Projects. He peeped the young boy spitting them freestyles and was like, nah, this kid got it. So, he took him under his wing and signed him to Cash Money Records in 1993. Wayne looked at Birdman like a pops. Music, literally calling him daddy, especially after his biological stepfather got killed in 1997. For years, this relationship seemed solid as a rock. They collabed on everything, built a whole empire together. And Birdman Music stayed proclaiming Wayne as his son who he'd die for. But things started getting shaky around December 2014 when Wayne hopped on Twitter and aired out his frustrations, saying he felt like a prisoner at Cash Money because they kept holding up the release of his album, Thaw Carter 5. Wayne was accusing Baby of the project and not cutting him his bread. This wasn't just some minor disagreement, fam. Wheezy was genuinely sick of the situation. By January 2015, he had filed a massive $51 million lawsuit against Birdman and Cash Money Records, claiming they breached his contract and owed him hella money in advances. Now, here's where Rick Ross enters the chat. Ross, who had built his own empire with Maybach Music Group, was watching this whole thing go down from the sidelines. He respected Wayne as an artist and what he accomplished in the game. So, when he peeped what he saw as exploitation and straight up disrespect, it hit different.
It's one of those things that when you're a student and you know, you admire someone from a distance, then you get opportunity to work with them and you working, you know, along with them, and then you begin to see things that you really don't, you know, respect or, you know, or didn't expect to see.
It hit different for him. That right there is Ross breaking down how his music whole perspective switched up. When you're looking up to somebody from a distance, you build up this image in your head of who they are. But once you get close to them and actually peep how they move behind closed doors, sometimes that image gets shattered completely. Feel me? The whole situation got way more serious in April 2015, when Wayne's tour bus got shot up in Atlanta after a club appearance. Nobody got hurt, but it sent shockwaves through the whole industry. The police investigation reportedly connected the shooting to people linked up with Birdman, though Baby denied any involvement in the charges. Eventually got dropped in 2019 because they ain't have enough evidence. But just that association with some street activity like that changed how folks was looking at the whole situation. Throughout 2015 and into 2016, Ross started making his feelings known publicly on his Black Market album. In December 2015, Ross dropped a track called Color Money, with bars that everybody knew was aimed at Birdman. He was spitting about having more bread than that you're signed to. A clear shot at what Ross felt was going down with Wayne's situation at Cash Money. And when Birdman had that legendary Breakfast Club appearance in April 2016, Ross couldn't help but get in on that action. For those who don't remember, Baby walked into that interview and immediately started demanding respect, telling the host to stop playing with his name before bouncing out after barely 2 minutes. That moment became an instant classic fam with "Put some respect on my name" becoming one of the most quotable phrases in hip-hop history. And Ross, he responded by sending Breakfast Club host Charlemagne Thaggett bottles of his Bear Ross as a petty little jab at Birdman's expense. It was subtle, but the message was clear. Ross was positioning himself against the Cash Money boss. But the real escalation was still coming. By September 2016, with Wayne still expressing frustration and even threatening to retire on Twitter, Ross quoted a tweet suggesting Wayne should slide over to Maybach Music Group, adding, "Get Birdman on the phone." That was a straight-up challenge. Ross positioning himself as Wayne's potential savior while simultaneously undermining Birdman's authority over his own artist. What made this situation hit different for Birdman was that he genuinely believed his relationship with Ross was solid. In an interview during this time, Baby expressed confusion about why Ross would insert himself into the situation. Birdman seemed genuinely confused by Ross' sudden energy toward him. From where he was standing, they had been close homies who kicked it on the regular. The Cash Money boss even acknowledged that Ross in the Miami scene was part of why he established such a strong presence in that city. So, the fact that Ross would publicly come at him felt like straight betrayal. But Ross had his reasons, fam, and they went deeper than just Lil Wayne. There was another person involved who pushed Ross over the edge. His day one homie, DJ Khaled. According to Ross, Khaled had also been affected by what Ross saw as Birdman's grimy business moves. This put a whole other layer on the beef. It wasn't just about Wheezy no more. Ross felt like multiple people he was tight with had been done dirty by Birdman. And once you start burning bridges with the people closest to somebody, that's when things become unfixable for real. Idols become rivals. Everything came to a head in March 2017 when Rick Ross dropped what a lot of folks consider the centerpiece of this whole beef, a track called Idols Become Rivals featuring Chris Rock. This wasn't just your typical diss track, fam. It was a whole narrative breakdown of Birdman's character and how he handled business. Ross put his whole music chest into this one, and the streets felt every bar. The joint appeared on Ross' album, Rather You Than Me, and it ain't hold nothing back. Ross was accusing Birdman of exploiting Wayne, DJ Khaled, and other artists just to fund music his flashalafestal while leaving the actual creatives financially starving. The bars spoke directly to Birdman, with Ross rapping about how his idol used to give him self-esteem and motivation, but was also dipping in his pockets before he could even count to 5. He prayed for Baby to find some kindness in his heart for Wayne, acknowledging that Wezzy had given his whole life to help Birdman eat. The track also included a pointed request for all producers to get paid, a reference to all those reports about financial disputes between Cash Money and various collaborators over the age. Ross was essentially putting Birdman on full blast for what he saw as a pattern of exploitation that went way beyond just one artist. He wasn't just speaking for himself, neither. He was speaking for everybody who felt like they got played by the Cash Money system. Music. What made the track hit even harder was the inclusion of Chris Rock. Having a legendary comedian on a diss track added a whole different element to it, making the message feel more like a public roast than just music. Typical rap beef. Ross was making sure everybody understood this wasn't just about trading bars. This was about exposing what he saw as a pattern of mistreatment that had been going on for way too long. In interviews after the release, Ross explained his motivations clearly. He ain't view what he did as your standard music disc record. He called it a clean your face record meant to hold Birdman accountable for his actions. The distinction was important to Rose because he wanted people to understand this wasn't about clout chasing or trying to start drama for no reason. Rose went even deeper on his stance, explaining that he felt it was time for somebody to let Birdman know that his moves ain't gangster and that he wouldn't be getting no more respect. This wasn't about chasing clout or stirring up drama for the entertainment. Ross genuinely believed he was standing up for people who got done wrong. In his mind, somebody needed to say what everybody else was thinking, but was too scared to put on wax. In a Billboard interview, Ross went even harder, expressing his frustration at the whole situation. He argued that Birdman should have been in the building making sure his artists was straight, not caught up in lawsuits while everybody's starving creatively and financially. Ross' whole perspective was that the music industry is supposed to be about making art and taking care of the people who create it, not about exploitation and legal drama. He couldn't understand how somebody could watch their own artists struggle while living lavishly off the work those same artists put in. Ross also made it clear that his issue wasn't just about money, it was about principle. He felt like the way Birdman moved violated the unwritten codes of how you're supposed to treat people who helped build your empire. When you got artists who dedicated their whole careers to making you rich, the least you could do is make sure they eating too. That's just basic respect in the game. And Ross felt like Birdman wasn't showing none of that. Birdman's initial response to Idols Become Rivals music was kind of dismissive. He told interviewers that he ain't get caught up in what he called preferring to stay focused on his numbers and keep it moving. He emphasized his identity as a man who stands on his own too and handles his business. suggesting he wasn't about to engage in no public back and forth over the track. Baby wanted to project that image of being above the drama, like Ross' words ain't affect him at all. But by October 2017, Birdman's patience was clearly running thin. Something had shifted, and Baby wasn't holding his tongue no more. He hopped on Instagram Live for a nearly 10-minute rant, calling out his critics without dropping names directly. He was referring to them as little bitty bit, and issued what many took as a veiled threat, saying, "You don't want to see no murder." While he ain't explicitly mentioned Ross, the timing and context made it obvious who he was addressing. The whole rant had a different energy to it, like Baby was finally fed up with everybody coming at him. Baby also defended his relationship with Wayne during this rant, emphasizing that Wayne was his son whom he raised from a young end, especially not someone he considered beneath him. Birdman was positioning himself as somebody who handles things different, not through music or social media, but through real-life actions. Ross wasn't about to let that slide though. He fired back with his own video response filmed from what looked like some tropical vacation spot, keeping it completely relaxed while delivering some sharp words. That clapback summed up Ross' whole position. He felt like Birdman was putting on a show instead of simply doing what needed to be done, which was to cut Wayne his check. The reference to being 5 years late spoke to how long Wayne's financial disputes with Cash Money had been dragging on publicly. At that point, Ross was basically saying, all this tough talk don't mean nothing when you still owe people bread. The exchange highlighted how different these two approached conflict. Birdman liked to project strength through intimidation and keeping it music dismissive, while Ross took a more direct approach, basically telling Baby to handle his business instead of making threats on the gram. It was two different philosophies, clashing, one based on street posturing and the other based on accountability. What made this period wild was the broader context of what was happening with Wayne. Throughout all this public drama, Weezy was still signed to Cash Money and working out of studios right next to Birdman. Baby himself acknowledged this crazy dynamic in an interview, painting a picture of how awkward the whole situation really was. Imagine that tension, fam. Two people in an ongoing legal battle, working in studios right next to each other, passing by one another, but not saying a word. The energy in that building must have been thick enough to cut with a knife. Birdman acknowledged that while the situation affected their personal relationship, he never wanted the music business to destroy what they had built as a family. Despite everything, he still saw Wayne as his son and held out hope they could work things out eventually. The resolution finally came through in June 2018 when Wayne and Birdman settled their $51 million lawsuit. Weezy got control of Thaw Carter 5, which dropped in September that year, and he was able to leave Cash Money while keeping his stake in Young Money. The terms stayed private, but word on the street was Wayne received over $10 million as part of the settlement. After years of legal battles and public drama, it seemed like both sides were finally ready to move forward. The reconciliation went public at Liliana Fest in August 2018, where Birdman pulled up and declared his love for Wayne, calling him the greatest. It seemed like the chapter was finally closing, at least between those two. The fans who had watched this drama unfold for years were relieved to see them back in good terms, even if the road to get there had been rocky as hell. Recent escalations and unfinished business. So, here's where things get real interesting and bring us to present day. While Wayne and Birdman appeared to have squashed their issues, the tension between Ross and Birdman never really went away. Fam, it's been simmering beneath the surface for years, occasionally flaring up in interviews and all over social media. And what makes this whole thing even more complex is how other people in the industry have viewed and spoken on the situation over the years. In July 2022, Birdman pulled up on DJ Academic's Off Record podcast and took some direct shots at Ross, accusing him of biting his style and studying his moves before launching his own label. Baby reiterated how tight they used to be, but expressed feeling some type of way about what he saw as Ross adopting his hustler persona and building Maybach Music Group using plays straight from the Cash Money playbook. Music, this accusation touched on something deeper than just the Wayne situation. Birdman seemed to feel that Ross had learned from him, and Thon used that knowledge against him. Whether there's truth to that perspective is debatable, but it shows that Birdman's grievances go way beyond just the public criticism Ross threw at him. In Baby's mind, he had helped create Ross in a sense, and to have Ross turn around and publicly music diss him felt like the ultimate betrayal. More recently, Birdman been even more explicit about his feelings toward Rose. Baby made it absolutely clear where he stands and how he would handle things if it ever came down to it. That statement carries heavyweight music, fam. Birdman essentially saying that while he don't believe in going back and forth publicly, he takes any disrespect personal and handles music things different. He positioning himself as somebody who came up in them streets and still moves with that mentality, implying that if there's a real problem, it gets handled face music to face, not on the internet. Baby ain't the type to be trading diss tracks. He built different. What's interesting about Birdman's approach to this whole thing is how consistent he been in maintaining that he don't understand why Ross turned on him in the first place. Even now, years later, he's still expressing confusion about what motivated Ross to get involved in what he considers family business. Now, it's also worth noting how other artists who was around during this whole situation viewed what went down. Gouda, who was signed to Young Money and was in the trenches with Wayne throughout the whole Cash Money dispute, spoke about what it was like watching the beef unfold from the inside. That testimony right there gives you a glimpse into what Wayne and music his camp was going through during the height of all this drama. While the public was seeing the tweets and the interviews and the legal filings behind closed doors, Wayne and his team was just trying to push through and keep making music despite all the chaos surrounding them. That takes a certain level of resilience and dedication to your craft that not everybody got. Trick Daddy also weighed in on the whole situation, offering his perspective as somebody who had relationships with multiple people involved. Trick, being a Miami legend himself, had history with both Ross and the Cash Money camp, which gave him a unique vantage point on the beef. Trick made a solid point there. He acknowledged that he still music respected Birdman, while also recognizing that the financial disputes between Baby and Wayne wasn't really his place to get involved in. He specifically noted that he couldn't argue about somebody else's money situation, which is a stance that some would say Ross should have taken. But Trick also made it clear music that Birdman could have handled things better when the drama first started. Meanwhile, the beef been referenced in other conflicts, too, including Ross' well-documented issues with Drake in 2024, which ties back to Cash Money, since Drizzy came up through Young Money. Social media posts from 2025 and 2026 continue to revisit idols, become rivals whenever discussions about Ross discs or Birdman's business practices come up. Folks frequently cite that track as one of the hardest moments in this whole rivalry. What's also worth noting is how other figures in the game weighed in on the situation. 50 Cent, for example, dropped some gems when the Wayne-Birdman dispute was at its peak, offering a warning that would prove to be prophetic. That warning turned out to be facts in a way. Wayne and Birdman did patch things up, just like 50 called it. But Ross, he's still on the outside of that reconciliation. And Birdman made it clear that forgiveness ain't necessarily on the table for him. 50 understood the dynamics of how these situations play out. Family beefs got a different resolution process than beefs between people who ain't got that same bond. From Ross' perspective, he probably feels vindicated. Wayne eventually got paid and got control of his music. The issues Ross highlighted about artist exploitation at Cash Money got validated by the settlement. Whether Birdman sees it the same way is a whole different conversation. For Birdman, the situation represents a betrayal by somebody he considered a brother. He maintains that he schooled Ross on valuable lessons about the industry and embraced him when was coming up, to then have Rose publicly criticize him and align with Wayne during their dispute feels like getting stabbed in the back from his point of view. Like this video. All